Hello everyone, my name is Karina. I go by Kartsie on social media, and welcome to part 2 of the Making of Fred Jones for my Scooby Doo 60s AU series. In this series, I'm bringing to life the mystery gang from Scooby Doo with the help of my best friends. The target year is 1969 when the show first aired, and so far we have brought to life Velma Dinkley and a gender bend of Shaggy Rogers. In the last video, we made Fred's button-up shirt with pointed collar and his signature orange ascot. Today, we'll be making his bell-bottom pants, talking briefly on his white sweater, and having the character reveal. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. I went through many challenges with this costume and had to restart the pants at one point, but more on that later. After hunting as many reference images as I could to really dissect Fred's design, I was able to pinpoint 4 main things that I needed to think about while making the pants. The first is that in episode 15, Spooky Space Kook from 1969, Fred is shown to have a brown belt, so we know his pant needs belt loops. Second is that in most promotional images of Fred, he is drawn with his hand in his pocket, so the pant will need big pockets. Third is hemline. The hemline of the pant ends in a specific spot on the shoe. This is an important proportion of the design, and since Fred's look is all about the small details, this will be a big one to get right. And the fourth thing to note is that he wears bell-bottom pants. From what I can gather, bell-bottoms started in the Navy in the 1800s. Some people crediting it to 1817. The wide bottom allowed for sailors to roll their pants up as they worked and put them on quickly. We see bell-bottoms emerge into fashion with a narrower upper leg in the late 60s within the final 3 years. That trend then carries on and becomes more mainstream in the 70s. Funnily enough, Fred is actually a primary source showing the popularity of this trend because he was created with that design. This is a Simplicity 8255 vintage pattern that I ordered off a seller on Etsy, dated to 1969. The style is a hip hugger bell bottom. The back specifically mentions it is to be worn 1.5 inches from natural waist. It has belt loops and pockets. Look at how awesome these pockets are. It's very peculiar, but I love the design so much. After reading the to be worn 1.5 inches from normal waist part, I realized that this is an important detail to note about the evolution of men's pants. Where your pant or trousers sit in comparison to your waist has changed over time for both women's and men's wear. Your natural waist is where your body bends. It's like right here, right underneath your ribcage. So as you move, that's where your waist is, right under the ribcage. And that's where, like, for instance, what I'm wearing here, like pants that sit at natural waist, high rise, that's where they sit. And so the farther you go back in time, the more pants are high rise and not low rise or mid rise. If you look at the 20s, 30s, and even continuing into the 40s and 50s, you see a lot of high-waisted trousers with a loose fit and style, creating the appearance of a shorter torso, thus lengthening the legs. Now, I'm not exactly certain when mid-rise comes into fashion, as I still have to dive deep further into the evolution of pants and history as a whole, and a lot of illustrations it's hard for me to see exactly where some of these pants are falling, so I'm not sure exactly when mid-rise starts to happen. But what I do know is that as we get into the 60s, fashion gets a lot tighter. In menswear especially, you see the pants no longer being loose like they were in the 50s and the 40s, but they're becoming more narrow, more form-fitting, and we also see that happening with shirts, so button-ups, everything's becoming tighter. So instead of going into the history of pullover sweaters, I want to instead talk about how difficult it was to find a pullover sweater for Fred. There was a lot of challenges with this, but this is probably one of the biggest challenges besides the pant for Fred's look, finding the right sweater. Fred's sweater is long-sleeved, pure white, and has what I assume to be a V neckline. The neckline is important because the lower design allows the ascot space to sit properly. So at first I tried to buy the sweater, but it was almost impossible to find the neckline I wanted, plus the color that I wanted, which is pure white, and the thickness of the knit. So like 3 factors, and I could not find a retail sweater like that at all. I tried many places, one of them being Amazon, but it just didn't really work. I tried to find a vintage sweater, but I couldn't find any that matched that description. The one sweater I did find was from the 70s with this lovely blue stripes across it. I bought this sweater because I liked how it felt like the 2000s Fred design, and I wanted to try it out with the look as another version of Fred and for the photo shoot. When it arrived, however, I discovered that although it looks pure white in the listing, it was off-white in person, possibly from age, which is just another reason why you can't really buy a vintage sweater for Fred either, because most white things have already aged and gone off-white. So anyone looking for vintage things in white, be aware that listings will look brighter than they actually are, and when you get it, you might be surprised to see that they're actually off-white and not pure white. So I couldn't find a vintage sweater, and when I tried to go on the modern marketplace, so I tried Amazon, but we tried it on with the look, and it was so atrocious that Amantia, our model Fred's sister, who modeled Velma for us, she turned to me and literally said,
"We tested multiple sweaters and they all looked like bad. So I volunteered my services because I couldn't stand how bad they looked."
And I really appreciate this.
I appreciate you too. Monty be like, "I'm starting to work more shifts and I'm going back to school. Time to knit."
So Amantia very graciously knitted the Fred sweater for this video. She followed along with a vintage pattern that was slightly confusing with acrylic yarn because our budget by this point was low. So Fred's shoes. So unfortunately we had no budget for shoes. So instead I went to Mateo, who was wearing Fred, and asked him if he had anything of his dad's. So we went through his dad's shoes and we found this pair. So Fred's shoes are square-toed at the front, light brown, leaning towards yellow in the cartoon. I found some vintage ads that look like the style that he's wearing. So although the shoe that we found isn't exactly what Fred is wearing, I think it's close enough that it has the spirit of the character and it's gonna work out great. The hunt for the perfect blue. This is the reason my budget took a turn for the worst. The number of times I had to dye and re-dye the pant was just too much. Every character in the Scooby Doo project is some way and form having something dyed for them, custom colored. And Fred is no exception to this, and he's the most dye intensive. And you might ask why. He is similar to Fred in which they both wear 2 items of clothing that have the same color. With Velma, it was a little easier because we just picked a yarn and then I color matched socks to that yarn. But with Fred, it was trickier because I had to dye both items of clothing to match each other. But that presented a new question. How do I make this blue? My main savior in this color task was the Rit Dye website. I went on it and shuffled through all the colors they claimed to be able to be created with mixing their product, and I landed on a few promising ones and went to experimenting. I tried and bought their aquamarine, their royal blue, and their indigo. And from there, I made a bunch of swatches experimenting what combination of colors and how long in the pot. Like created what color. For the pant, I decided on a cotton twill weave bottom weight material from Hobby Lobby, and the shirt a plain weave cotton from Joann's. So my hope was that by keeping them the same natural fiber, they would take the dye color the same way, resulting in the same color. This was my hope, but that didn't really actually happen. Because what I ended up realizing was that because they broadcasted the plain weave and the twill is a more complex weave, they take the color in different ways, even though they are the same fiber. So I had to dye the cotton twill more to get the color than the plain weave, because it really needed to soak into that fabric. So in the end, I discovered that by dyeing the material royal blue, it created a dusty blue, which could then be brightened with the aquamarine to give a vibrant effect, which my camera loves to pick up on. All my cameras love this color. So without further ado, let's split up, gang, and solve Fred's costume. At the beginning of the Fred project, I was operating completely with only boiled water and buckets. Although I had a pot I could keep on constant heat on the stove for the swatches, the large amount of fabric for Fred couldn't be put on the stove. I also had the issue of figuring out how to color match both fabrics. So for my first attempt, I put both the shirt and the pant fabric in the same dye bath bucket, and I hoped that they would both somehow magically result in the same colors since they're in the same bath together. And because they're the same fiber. This singular dye bath experiment didn't work. There was so much fabric that it created air pockets inside the bucket, and there were sections where the dye just wasn't even and it didn't seep into it. So I discovered that the two fabrics could not be dyed together. As I said before, the lighter weight shirt material just got darker faster, and the heavier weight twill material took longer to soak in the dye. I then proceeded to dye the material again over and over, separately, to try to eliminate the uneven dye patterns and build up the color. The shirt fabric got to a point where I could use it, but the pant material had to be dyed 5 times to get to the color. And it still was patchy in places from trial and error. I had to completely scrap all the dye work though because of how uneven everything was, which on reflection was great because that just meant that I was not gonna settle with bad dye work. But on the other hand, it meant that I had to re-dye everything again. The next time I was ready to dye the real thing was months later, when for a project I'm not announcing yet, I took the plunge and got myself a stainless steel giant pot. Instead of going back and forth from the kitchen to a bucket to boiling water, I could straight up just fill the pot with water and boil it outside on my old grill. But I still had the issue that if I were to dye all the fabric needed for the pant, it would be too big for the pot. If I cut out all the fabric first for the pant, and then individually dyed each piece, I would theoretically get a more even and consistent dye, and that's exactly what ended up happening. So I set up a minute timer, every piece would go in for 30 seconds, then pull out, washed, and I progressively had to put in more aquamarine and dye the pieces again and again and again, until the pant color became closer enough to the shirt color. In total, I dyed the pant somewhere between 3 and 4 times to color match for this pant, not including the other pant that failed. Okay, so the more I observe this pattern, the more I'm realizing that the yoke that I thought was going to go at the back of the pattern actually goes to the front, which makes it the full pant. And then we also have the pocket here, as well as the other piece, which is part of the pocket and goes like that. So pocket's out of the way and the yoke right here, I went ahead and traced that down. But here we have the pant, and right here is where the yoke is. So I'm gonna go ahead and trace the other pant leg and also begin sizing this down in the best way that I can. Hello, it is a Saturday morning and I am working on cleaning up the room a bit so that I have space to start opening up more patterns and editing other stuff. Over here I have like a wall of patterns going on. Right here is Olivia's pants, right here is Mateo's pants, so Shaggy and then Fred. Over here obviously the mock-up for Fred's shirt. I'm also listening to some 60s music. I've noticed that every time I start a project I tend to have like a soundtrack that I play that has to do with the project. So when I was building Violet Evergarden, I only listened to the Violet Evergarden soundtrack. And then now doing Scooby Doo, I'm just having 60s music. So that's what goes on in the background of a lot of my videos. Music that has to do with exactly what I'm building. And this is where I tell you never to skip the mock-up because I was being a dum-dum. For whatever reason, even though I told myself I should do a mock-up, I didn't, in fact, do a mock-up. After cutting out the pant, I recalculated and realized I had an incorrect measurement and that the pant just wouldn't fit, which is what resulted in the first dye pant getting scrapped. This stressed me out, so I ignored it and continued with Shaggy and the button-up shirt. Eventually, I went back to tackle the skeleton in my closet and got to work on drafting the first Fred pant mock-up for a fitting. This was my first fully realized men's pants, so I tried to give myself some grace. The fitting showed a lot of problems with the pattern. The two biggest issues with this iteration was that the pant was too long and the girth needed to be adjusted to give more room. So I went back to the pattern and adjusted it again. I double-checked measurements, looked at more examples of men's pant patterns, and then cut and sewed a new one. For this mock-up, I decided not to do fully realized pockets and to just have it thread marked instead. In my adjustment of the pant, I heightened the pant back to natural waist to figure out the other measurements. But by doing so, I accidentally forgot to lower it again for the fitting, and I placed the zipper too high, making it a little hard to get into that pant. Sorry, Mateo. So the length is great now, but now I needed to lower that waistline back to being 1.5 inches below natural waist. We have a lovely little preview here that I took a photo of progress, kind of envisioning how everything was gonna turn out in the end. And it was looking great so far. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going in and just doing the very small alteration that needs to happen to the pant, which is just to lower it down 2 inches. Once I got the pattern to this point, I could go ahead and finally draft the pockets with the yoke and all the other bits as well. Okay, so there are some lining materials to cut out. These are the pieces. And what essentially those are meant for, right here's the fly and then up the girth of the pant. And as you can see, right here there is this extra piece that is sewn into the crotch along the seams. And what this does is it helps reinforce that seam. So the way I had done it in class was that we just cut a piece in that shape and then rolled over the edges with a narrow hem and then attached it. But the way this pattern is doing is instead of having to do the trouble of doing a rolled hem, just having this piece mirrored out so that we just have a fold that we can fold over. So this becomes double the material with a line here that we don't have to sew because it's just the fabric folded over. So to cut those pieces out, along with some other lining pieces that I have to cut out for the pant, I'm going to be using the shirt fabric that I dyed. I've gone ahead and started doing the reinforcement stitches. I don't know if you can see that yet. See that line right there? And on one pant, it gets a couple more than just the corner. But what the pattern wants me to do now is it wants me to take the zipper, which I have just sewn down on one edge, and actually, interesting enough, flip it this way, sew here to a certain mark that I marked from the pattern, and then clip the corner and turn it inside out. In essence, a corner like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and try that out. But focusing on the zipper, I went ahead and I sewed down the curve that happens on the front. And I've also been working on the placket, which you can see I put interfacing on one side. And this is what covers the zipper on the other side. So it keeps the zipper teeth from touching you when you have the pant on. So this is the placket that does that. Once I got towards making the interiors for the pant, I got a little fancy because I've been having this trend throughout the Scooby Doo projects that I want all the interiors to have some sort of colorful, fun elements that nod to their characters. So for Fred's pockets, I decided that I wanted to use orange bias binding to finish all the raw edges, which in the end creates a really pretty interior with colors that nod completely to his character. And this is a detail that only us, me, the creator, and my my models as well will notice, but I think it's something really lovely that ties everything together. So once the fly was in and all the pockets were in, I went ahead and sewed up both side seams and then got to work on the waistband and all the belt loops. Okay, so I'm gonna sew on the waistband, which is then gonna get flipped so that the belt loop is here and that can get turned under and sewn down. And the key points of where to put the belt loop is not only to evenly distribute it, but also put it on points where the material isn't getting too thick. For instance, I have a lot of seams right here, so it makes more sense to put the belt loop right next to that where there is one layer of material, and that helps keep like your needle not gonna get stuck randomly and reduces bulk and just makes the pant look better overall. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew this. Okay, so I have this at the machine and we have the belt loops and I have my needle out the farthest it's gonna go and the waistband is up, so this is not being sewn into the waistband, we're just to the first layer of the pant itself. So the fourth fitting was the final fitting. The pant was all sewn up in the real fabric and I could see every part of the costume finally together. There were some things we changed and things that needed to be fixed to the stage too. The belt loops needed to be made smaller and the belt was swapped for one that better matched the shoes. The biggest issue was a bunching happening in the waistline, which was just an indication that it needed to be taken in more, and this was very simple to fix. But there was one thing that was not fixable at this stage, and that was the side seam of the pant. It didn't fall straight and it curved into the front of the pant leg. Somehow I didn't catch this into the mock-up fittings, and I'm kicking myself for this really, but there's no way to fix it other than just restarting everything again, and I have no budget for that. So at this point I was like, you know what, I'm going to let it go, and we're gonna keep going. And with that final button, it's time to reveal Fred Jones. So in conclusion, Fred took so much time to complete from mock-up after mock-up in school, because there was a lot of school intervention that stopped me from making progress. It was a struggle to find time and get through everything. I was constantly fighting the perfectionist in me, which resulted in a lot of stress. And even now, I know that if I did it again, I could do better. I'm very proud of the even dye I was able to do and the color matching I was able to do. And I'm very excited to see how I can improve in my dye work and experiment with other colors in the future. So the way these photo shoots work is that my mother and I, we pre-plan ahead, figuring out and scouting areas as we go about our daily lives. And for Fred, it was a little difficult because in the previous photo shoots, I have this trend going on of the environments the characters in having the same colors as their clothing and kind of creating this monochromatic feel to the images that's very to the 60s period. And it was very hard to find areas for Fred that did the same thing. So we had one wall in mind, which was this beautiful yellow print wall that actually happened to be outside my chiropractor. And it was really hot that day. I had to pre-plan ahead. Amantia had the fan ready, fanning Mateo at every location because he was in an acrylic sweater in layers, and we needed to make sure that none of us overheated during this photo shoot. And from there, we just drove around after that location and found random little things, random little spots around town that looked like it fit it perfectly. For instance, this vertical striped fence, which was right across from that door, orange door that you see over there. This was a very funny location because there were some construction people behind us looking at us like we were idiots, but we carried on. We were in a group, so we had enough confidence to do so. I really love the vertical lines on this fence. As soon as I saw it, I knew I needed to take photos with the sweater right here, which is the second look we have for Fred, of course nodding to the 2000s version of Fred that I grew up with. And the final location that we found is, well, we got lost and we ended up in a different location that we did not intend to. We saw this building on the other side of the street, and it was super hard to get to this building, but eventually we found the road that led us into it, and we took photos with this completely white building because I knew that I wanted at least to find one location that had a lot of white to really showcase the sweater. So thank you to all my friends and family involved in this project, to my mother for helping finding locations and driving us, Amantia for gifting me her time to knit the sweater and being a fabulous assistant during the shoot, and Mateo for modeling, as well as Olivia for being our shagging in the previous videos. Thank you guys so much. And now it's on to solving the mystery of making the costume I'm wearing. Daphne Blake. Hello, Monty.
Hello, Karina.
What you up to?
Unpaid labor.
Listen.
I'm kidding. I offered to do this.
Hello, everyone. Ah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the making of Fred Jones. Part 2 of the making of Fred Jones. It's been a while.